Rick Pike always said the outskirts of Hollow Creek turned into a different world at night. Out here, the cornfield swallowed sound. The sky stretched wide and empty. The town's problems felt 100 miles away. It was the kind of place where a 17-year-old could pretend he wasn't stuck in a dying town with a foggy future. Tonight, the world felt even smaller. Samantha Rowan was curled up beside him in the cab of his old Ford pickup, her head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. The radio was off, the windows were cracked, and the only sounds were crickets and the soft rustle of corn in the breeze. They'd come out here for privacy, the kind teenagers always hunt for in small towns. Sneaking out to the truck had become their ritual. A blanket in the back seat, whispered jokes, kisses that tasted like cherry lip balm. It was the kind of closeness that made the rest of the world fade out. Just two people who cared about each other, wrapped up in a moment that felt bigger than it was. Samantha nudged him with her elbow. "You're quiet," she said. "That's usually my job." Rick smiled. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how I'm supposed to go home in like 10 minutes and pretend I wasn't out here with you." She smirked. "You're terrible at pretending." "Yeah, well, you're a bad influence." "Please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You were corrupted long before I showed up." He laughed, and she leaned in to kiss him again, soft and warm and familiar. Then she froze. "Rick, do you smell that?" He blinked. "Smell what?" She sat up straighter, sniffing the air. "It's like chemicals. Sharp, like burnt plastic." Rick breathed in. At first, he didn't notice anything. Then it hit him. Faint but distinct, carried on the breeze from town. "Probably the plant," he said. "They've been doing overnight maintenance all week." "Yeah, but it's never smelled like that." She was right. The scent was metallic, acidic, almost sweet in a way that made the back of Rick's throat prickle. He sat up and looked through the windshield. That's when he saw it. A low fog crept along the distant tree line. It was pale, sickly green, and it caught the moonlight in a slow, unnatural shimmer, thick and wrong against the dark trees. "What the hell?" Rick whispered. Samantha leaned forward and gripped his arm. "Rick, that's coming from town." He swallowed hard. "Yeah, I know." Neither of them moved for a moment. The fog crept forward, hugging the ground, spreading wider by the second. It pulsed in slow, rolling waves, in a way fog had no business doing. A cold weight pressed behind Rick's ribs. "We should go," Samantha said quietly. "Yeah." He turned the key. The truck rumbled to life, and the headlights cut through the shadows, lighting up the gravel road ahead. As he shifted into gear, Samantha kept watching the fog through the back window. "Do you think it's dangerous?" she asked. "I don't know," Rick said, "but I don't want to find out." They drove in silence, the truck bouncing over potholes. The smell grew stronger the closer they got to town, sharp enough to sting Rick's eyes. Samantha rolled up her window. "This is bad. I can feel it." Rick didn't argue. His chest felt tight, and not from the fumes. Something was unnatural. As they crested the hill overlooking Hollow Creek, the town came into view, and Rick slammed on the brakes. The fog had already reached the outskirts. Streetlights glowed dimly through the haze, their light thin and failing. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Then another, then another. Samantha's voice trembled. "Rick, what's happening?" He didn't know, but he knew one thing. Whatever was happening, they'd missed the start of it, and that might be the only reason they were still alive. He pressed the gas. They drove into town. The fog reached Hollow Creek just after midnight. It rolled in, low and thick, hugging the pavement, seeping into every gutter and crack in the road. Streetlights flickered as it passed, throwing warped shadows across empty sidewalks. The town, half asleep and unaware, didn't stand a chance. Jeff Ellison was already awake when the first call came in. He'd been restocking the ambulance at the station, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the scanner hum in the background, and the night had been silent until it wasn't.
Unit 3, we got a disturbance at the diner. Possible assault. 1 male, unresponsive to commands. EMT requested.
Jeff grabbed his gear and headed out. By the time he reached the diner, Bridget Holt was already there, standing in the parking lot with her hand on her holstered weapon, eyes locked on the front window. Inside, a man slammed his fists against the glass. "Jesus," Jeff muttered. "What happened?" Bridget didn't look away. "He came in about 20 minutes ago, ordered coffee, then started screaming, tried to bite the waitress. Missed. She got the kitchen door locked behind her in time." "Bite?" "Yeah, she's hiding in the kitchen. I tried to talk him down, but he's not responding. He keeps hitting the window." Jeff stepped closer. The man's face was pale and streaked with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot and wide, and his knuckles were raw from pounding the glass. "Do we know who he is?" "Local. Name's Carl Jensen. Works at the plant." Jeff's stomach turned. "The plant." Bridget nodded. "Night shift." Jeff looked at the fog curling around the street lamps. It was thicker now, almost glowing. The air smelled sharp and metallic, like burnt copper. "I don't like this," he said. "Me neither." The glass shattered. Carl burst through the window in a spray of shards and hit the pavement hard, a jagged piece opening his forearm to the bone on the way down. He scrambled up anyway, blood sheeting off his fingers and ropes, and lunged at Bridget with a scream that didn't sound human. She fired a warning shot into the air. It didn't stop him. Jeff dropped his bag and tackled Carl from the side, slamming him into the pavement. Carl thrashed and snarled, animalistic and wild. His strength was twitchy, frantic, and unnatural. Bridget helped restrain him, cuffing his wrists behind his back while he writhed and screamed. "Get the stretcher," she barked. Jeff ran for the ambulance, heart pounding. By the time they had Carl loaded in the back, he was convulsing, foam bubbling at the corners of his mouth, eyes rolling back in his head. Jeff checked his vitals. Pulse is erratic, breathing shallow. He's burning up. Bridget climbed into the passenger seat. "Let's get him to county." As Jeff pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Carl was staring at him, unblinking, motionless, his eyes fixed and empty. Rick and Samantha reached the edge of town minutes later. The fog was everywhere now, thick enough to swallow the road signs, heavy enough to make the headlights feel useless. Rick slowed the truck as they passed the diner. "Something happened here," Samantha said. The front window was shattered, blood stained the pavement, and a squad car sat parked at an angle, lights still flashing. Rick's hands tightened on the wheel. "We need to find my dad." Samantha nodded. "And Jeff. He'll know what's going on." They drove towards the center of town, past darkened houses and flickering street lamps. The fog clung to buildings and cars and trees, thick and unmoving, in no hurry to go anywhere. Then they saw the first body. A man lay sprawled in the road, limbs bent at angles joints weren't built for, his face frozen mid-scream with something dark crusted around his nose and eyes, where blood had dried from the inside out. Rick stopped the truck. Samantha whispered, "Is he?" Rick didn't answer. He stepped out, heart hammering, and walked closer. The man's skin had gone pale green. His eyes had blown out a deep, wet red. His mouth was stained and shadowed. Rick turned and threw up in the gutter. Samantha ran to him and pulled him back towards the truck. We need to go, she said. Now. As they climbed back inside, a scream tore through the shadowed area somewhere nearby, high and raw and terrified. Then another. Then another. Rick floored the gas. At County Hospital, Jeff and Bridget walked into a scene already spiraling out of control. The ER was flooded with patients showing the same symptoms. Sweating, shaking, screaming. Some were violent, others sat frozen and silent. The staff was overwhelmed. Jeff pulled a nurse aside. What the hell is happening? She shook her head. They're all from the plant. All night shift. They came in like this, one after another. Bridget scanned the room. It's the fog. It has to be. Jeff looked down at his hands, still stained with Carl's blood. He scanned the row of gurneys for him and didn't find him. Someone had already wheeled him further back, into whatever the hospital was doing with the ones who wouldn't stay down. A wave of dizziness passed through him, then faded. He turned to Bridget. We need to find Rick and Samantha before this gets worse. Bridget nodded. Let's move. Outside, the fog thickened. The infected multiplied, and Hollow Creek began to rot. By dawn, Hollow Creek had become a maze of sirens and shattered windows, screams echoing through the fog, high and broken. The green haze clung to everything, and the infected moved through it in twitching, snarling shapes, their eyes wide and unnatural. Rick and Samantha reached the hospital just after sunrise. The parking lot was a wreck of abandoned cars, blood smeared across the pavement. A nurse ran past them, sobbing, clutching a clipboard against her chest with both hands. Rick parked behind a dumpster and killed the engine. Stay close, he said. Samantha nodded, her face pale but steady. Inside, the waiting room had turned into a triage zone. Patients moaned on the floor. A man screamed in the corner, his arms wrapped in gauze. A woman sat against the wall, rocking, whispering something Rick couldn't hear. Jeff spotted them first. He pushed through a curtain, eyes wide, face drawn. Rick! Rick ran to him. What the hell is happening? Jeff didn't answer right away. He looked at Samantha, then back at Rick. You two weren't exposed. Rick shook his head. We were out past Miller Road, in the truck. Jeff let out a breath. That might have saved your lives. Bridget appeared behind him, uniform, stained, face grim. We've got 20 confirmed cases, all from the plant, all the same symptoms. Symptoms? Samantha asked. Jeff rubbed his temples. Aggression, delirium, skin discoloration, and something I can't explain. Bridget lowered her voice. They don't feel pain. They don't respond to commands. Something else is moving them. Not their own will. Rick swallowed hard. Like zombies. Jeff flinched. Their hearts are still beating. Something's burning them out from the inside, but it hasn't finished the job. Samantha looked around. How long do we have? Jeff didn't answer. Bridget did. Not long. They left the hospital an hour later. It wasn't safe anymore. The infected were spreading, not just from the plant, but from homes, cars, alleyways. Anyone who'd breathed the fog was at risk, and the fog hadn't stopped moving. They drove to the sheriff's station, hoping for backup. It was empty. Radios crackled with static, phones rang unanswered. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a desk, still fresh. Bridget locked the doors behind them. We need a plan. Jeff nodded. We need supplies, food, water, weapons. Rick looked at the map on the wall. We could hole up at the old maintenance depot. Thick walls, no windows. Samantha pointed towards the diner. We should check there first. I left my bag in back. It's got my meds. Bridget hesitated. We go fast. No splitting up. The diner was silent when they arrived. The front window was still shattered. Blood stained the floor, and the neon sign flickered weakly. Inside, the booth sat empty, the kitchen door hanging open. Samantha found her bag under the counter. Rick grabbed a fire axe from the emergency box, and Jeff checked the back room. That's when they heard it. A low, damp growl. Bridget spun, weapon raised. A figure lurched out of the pantry, hunched and twitching, its eyes glowing faintly green, its skin blistered. Its mouth hung open, teeth stained with blood. It lunged. Bridget fired twice. The figure dropped and didn't get back up, but its chest kept moving, slow and shallow, air dragging in and out of a body that should have stopped. Jeff knelt beside it, checking for a pulse. It was there. Faint, but steady. He looked up, face pale. A gun might not be enough to finish this. Rick gripped the axe tighter. Then we find out what is. They left the diner with heavier hearts. The infected kept changing, faster and stronger and less human with every hour, far past anything ordinary sickness could explain. And the fog kept spreading. As they drove towards the depot, Samantha leaned against Rick's shoulder. We're not gonna make it, are we? Rick didn't answer, but Jeff did. We'll make it, he said. We have to. Bridget stared out the window, watching the fog curl around the trees. She didn't speak. She didn't believe him. The maintenance depot sat on the far edge of Hollow Creek, half swallowed by trees and forgotten by anyone who didn't work for the county. It was a squat concrete bunker of a building. Thick walls, steel doors, no windows. The kind of place meant to survive storms and vandalism and decades of neglect. It would have to survive something much worse now. Rick parked the truck behind the loading bay, and the four of them hurried inside. Bridget locked the heavy door behind them, sliding the steel bolt into place with a metal thud that echoed through the empty building. For a moment, they all just stood there, listening. No screams, no sirens, no fog seeping under the door. The silence pressed on Rick's ears in a way he didn't like. Samantha exhaled shakily. It's quiet. Too quiet, Bridget muttered. Jeff set his medical bag on a workbench, and his eyes caught on a crowbar hanging by the door. He grabbed it and set it near the exit, within reach. Quiet is good. Quiet means we can think. Rick walked the perimeter, checking for fragile points. The depot was old, but solid. The walls were thick, the ventilation system was ancient but working. The back room held shelves of tools, spare parts, and dusty emergency supplies. It gave them walls thick enough to keep them alive. Nothing more. They spent the first day fortifying. Bridget reinforced the doors with metal shelving, dragging the heavy units across the concrete floor with a kind of angry determination. Every clang of metal rang off the concrete walls, loud enough to make Rick's teeth ache. She checked each bolt, twice, then braced the shelves with old tool cabinets from the corner. Sweat dripped down her temple, but she didn't stop. Keeping her hands busy kept her mind off the screams they'd heard on the drive over. Rick found plywood behind a rusted snowplow blade and used it to board up the small vents near the roof. He climbed a ladder that wobbled with every step, hammering nails into the concrete frame. Each strike sent a jolt through his arms. Something physical he could control. Samantha held the ladder steady, glancing up at him every few seconds, watching for any sign that the ladder wouldn't hold. He was reaching for the last nail when a face filled the vent cap, inches from his, pale and split at the cheek, mouth already opening. Rick shouted and threw himself backward off the ladder, and Samantha screamed and stumbled into the shelving. For one frozen second, nothing happened. Then the thing outside slammed itself against the vent, hard enough to buckle the plywood, and was gone, its footsteps scrabbling away across the roof. Rick lay on the concrete, heart slamming, staring at the board, waiting for it to give way on its own. "You okay?" Samantha's voice shook. Rick didn't answer right away. His hands wouldn't stop trembling long enough to pick the hammer back up. Samantha organized the supplies. Canned food, bottled water, a few old blankets, a radio that only picked up static. She lined everything up on a metal shelf, grouping items by type, then reorganizing them again when her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The radio hissed, on and off, a whisper that filled the silence. She turned the dial back and forth, hoping for a voice. Nothing came through. Jeff checked everyone for symptoms. He moved from person to person, shining a flashlight into their eyes, checking pulses, asking questions he already knew the answers to. He didn't mention the tremor in his left hand, or the headache pulsing behind his eyes since the hospital. He told himself it was stress, exhaustion, adrenaline. He didn't believe it. Every so often, he pressed his fingers to his temples, waiting for the throbbing to ease. It never did. He caught his reflection in a dusty window, pale and drawn, eyes too bright, and looked away fast. Outside, the fog pressed against the depot, swirling around the edges of the building as if searching for a way in. The green glow seeped through the smallest gaps, casting faint, sickly shadows across the floor. Inside, the four of them worked in silence, each one pretending not to notice how the air felt heavier with every hour. Night fell before they realized it, and the depot, for all its concrete and steel, suddenly felt far too small. On the second day, the fog thickened outside. Through the cracks in the doorframe, they could see it glowing faintly in the morning light, a sickly green haze drifting across the parking lot. It pulsed in slow waves, curling around the abandoned cars and creeping up the depot's walls, testing them for fragile spots. They heard the infected before they saw them. Low growls, shuffling footsteps, the scrape of nails on metal. The sounds echoed strangely through the fog, stretched and distorted, so it was impossible to tell how many were out there, or how close they were. Sometimes the noise seemed right outside the door. Other times it drifted away, swallowed by the haze. Bridget held her weapon tight, knuckles white. "They're searching." Rick swallowed hard. For what? Jeff didn't look up from the map he was studying. He'd spread it across a workbench, marking possible escape routes and supply caches. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept rubbing the bridge of his nose against a headache he wouldn't name. "Oh," he said quietly. Samantha shivered. "They can't know we're in here." Jeff didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. The infected moved differently today. Slower, their footsteps dragging, but their heads snapped toward every sound. Rick watched one shadow pause near the door, barely visible through the fog. It stood there for a long, agonizing moment, swaying gently, as if it were listening. Bridget motioned for everyone to stay silent. The shadow eventually moved on, swallowed by the haze. Samantha let out a trembling breath. "They're hunting." Rick nodded. "And we're trapped." Jeff finally looked up, his expression grim. "Then we stay quiet. We stay hidden. And we pray this fog burns itself out before they find a way in." No one argued. The depot felt smaller that day. The walls closer, the silence sharper. Every sound outside made them flinch. Every creak of the building put them on edge. The fog kept pressing in, patient and slow, with nowhere else to be. By the third day, the infected grew more aggressive. They slammed against the doors at night, snarling and clawing, their fists thudding against the metal hard enough to buckle it. The depot walls held, but the sound burrowed into their skulls, rattling the shelves they'd stacked as barricades. Every impact felt closer than the last. The infected were learning the building's weak points, one strike at a time. Sleep became impossible. Rick and Samantha curled up together on a pile of blankets, whispering to keep the fear away. Their voices stayed soft, barely audible of the growls outside. Samantha's fingers traced circles on Rick's arm, grounding herself in the warmth of his skin. Rick kept one hand on the fire axe beside them, gripping it hard enough that his fingers ached. "Do you think they'll break through?" Samantha whispered. Rick swallowed. "No. Bridget reinforced everything. We're safe." Even though he didn't believe it, Bridget stayed awake, pacing the perimeter with her flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows in sharp, jittery arcs, catching dust motes and the occasional spiderweb. Every time the infected slammed the door, she flinched. Not from fear, but from calculation. She counted the impacts, listening for a pattern, trying to work out how long the metal could hold. Her grip on the flashlight tightened until the plastic casing creaked. Jeff sat alone in the corner, rubbing his temples, trying to ignore the heat spreading through his veins. Sweat soaked through his shirt collar. His breath came in shallow bursts. He kept telling himself it was nothing, just stress, exhaustion, adrenaline. But the truth gnawed at him. He didn't tell them about the fever or the flashes of anger that came out of nowhere, sharp as sparks off a frayed wire. He didn't tell them about the moment earlier that day when he'd looked at Rick and, for a split second, seen only a shape, a threat, a blur of movement that spiked his pulse. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to steady himself. The infected outside screamed again, a long, ragged howl that rolled through the depot. Samantha buried her face in Rick's chest. Rick held her tighter. Bridget's hand found the crowbar leaning by the door and stayed there. Jeff's hands trembled without stopping. The night dragged on, hour after hour, the infected pounding without pause, the fog pressing against the walls. Inside, the four of them waited, exhausted and terrified, each one pretending they weren't already breaking. On day 5, the food and water were running low, and the fog showed no sign of lifting. It clung to the depot, thick and unmoving, coating the concrete in a film that never lifted, seeping into every crack of daylight, turning the world outside into a shifting green blur. Even from inside, they could smell it. Metallic, sharp, almost sweet. It coated the back of their throats and made every breath feel heavier than the last. Rick found an old battery-powered radio in the storage room. Dust coated the knobs and the antenna bent at an odd angle, but it was something. They gathered around it, huddled close as if proximity alone could force it to work. Static. Just static. Rick adjusted the dial. Samantha held her breath. Bridget leaned in with one hand resting on her holster. Jeff stood slightly apart, arms crossed, listening for something beyond the radio. Then a voice, faint and crackling and distorted.
Containment! Plant breach! Unknown chemical agent! Avoid exposure! Symptoms include...
The radio cut out, a sharp pop, then silence. Samantha hit the side of it. Come on, come on! Nothing. Just a low hiss of dead air. Rick tried again, turning the dial slowly, desperately, searching for even a whisper of the voice. The static rose and fell in long, uneven swells, but no words came back. Jeff stared at the dead radio, jaw clenched. His face was pale, sweat glistening at his hairline. They're not coming. Bridget said nothing. She didn't even blink. She just stared at the radio without moving, her expression flat and unreadable. Rick looked between them. So what do we do? Jeff closed his eyes, steadying himself against the wall. We survive. The way he said it, silent and strained, made Samantha's stomach twist. For the first time, she wasn't sure Jeff believed it. And for the first time, Rick wasn't sure any of them did. Jeff collapsed later that same day. One moment he was sorting supplies, stacking cans with mechanical precision, trying to pretend he still had control. The next, he was on the floor, shaking violently, his skin pale and slick with sweat, veins standing out dark and green-black beneath the surface, spreading in branching lines up both forearms. The clang of metal hitting concrete echoed through the depot, sharp and final. Samantha screamed for Bridget. Rick dropped to his knees beside Jeff, trying to hold him still as his limbs jerked. Jeff's eyes snapped open, red-rimmed and wild, unfocused. Don't touch me. His voice was unnatural, too deep, too strained, rough and unwilling, the words dragged out of him instead of spoken. Bridget grabbed Rick by the shoulders and yanked him back. Give him space! Jeff convulsed again, his back arching off the floor, his fingers clawed at the concrete, leaving faint streaks of blood where his nails tore. A raw, guttural sound tore out of his throat, unlike anything human. Then suddenly, he went still. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Jeff's ragged breathing and the distant scrape of infected outside. Rick's heart hammered in his chest. Samantha covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Bridget kept her weapon drawn, eyes locked on Jeff's unmoving form. Then Jeff whispered, barely audible, I'm fine. The words came out slurred and trembling, almost mocking in their weakness. Rick helped him sit up, hands trembling. Samantha fetched a blanket and draped it over Jeff's shoulders, even though he felt fever hot to the touch. Bridget watched him with a mix of fear and calculation, saying nothing. Jeff stared at the floor, breathing hard, his hands still shaking. I'm fine, he repeated, softer this time. Just dizzy. His voice had gone flat and hollow, and none of them believed him. Somewhere beyond the door, something threw itself against the metal again. The next day, Jeff insisted he was better. He wasn't. His hands shook constantly now, a fine tremor he couldn't hide even in his pockets. His eyes were glassy, sliding from object to object without recognition. The green tint in his skin had deepened too, climbing from his collarbones toward his jaw, a little more with each passing hour. He snapped at Rick over nothing. A misplaced can, a question asked too softly, a look that lingered too long. He snapped at Samantha for hovering, even though she was the one bringing him water and blankets and anything to make him comfortable. He snapped at Bridget for suggesting he rest, her voice calm but firm, the way it always was when she was scared. He apologized each time, but the apologies got weaker, shorter, less human. Bridget pulled Rick aside when Jeff wasn't looking. He's changing. Rick shook his head, too fast, too desperate. No, he's fighting it. Not enough. Rick's voice cracked. He saved us. Bridget's expression softened, the steel in her eyes flickering. I know. They both looked toward Jeff. He sat alone in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, staring at his trembling hands as though they weren't his own. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Every few seconds, his fingers twitched violently, as if answering a signal only he could hear. Samantha approached him slowly and knelt beside him. Jeff, talk to me. He didn't look at her, didn't blink, didn't move. For a moment, Rick thought he hadn't heard her. Then Jeff whispered, his voice hoarse and distant. I'm trying. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Trying what? Jeff swallowed hard, throat working. To stay with me. The words hung in the air, and none of them spoke to fill it. Rick felt something twist painfully inside him. Bridget looked away. Outside, the infected slammed against the walls again, weaker than before, but still stubborn. Inside, Jeff's silence was somehow worse, because they all knew what he was really fighting. And they all knew he was losing. On the 7th day, the infected outside grew quieter. Still there, but slower now. Samantha noticed it first. They're dying. Bridget nodded. The gas is burning them out. Rick looked at Jeff. Jeff looked away. That night, Jeff woke up screaming. Rick and Samantha bolted upright and Bridget grabbed her weapon. Jeff was on his knees, clutching his head, teeth clenched so hard blood dripped from his gums. Get out, he choked. Get away. Samantha reached for him. He lunged. Bridget put a round into the ceiling. Jeff froze, panting, eyes wild. Then, for a moment, just a moment, he was himself again. He looked at Rick, at Samantha, at Bridget, and he whispered, I'm sorry. Then he collapsed. The first week was over. The second week began with a sound none of them expected. Silence. The kind that made their skin crawl. Unnatural in a way that told them something was missing. Rick noticed it first. He sat up on his makeshift cot, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and listened. No growls, no scratching at the doors, no shuffling footsteps outside. Just the faint hum of the depot's old ventilation system. Samantha stirred beside him. What time is it? Early, Rick whispered. Too early. Bridget was already awake, sitting near the door with her weapon across her lap. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since they'd arrived. Jeff lay on the far side of the room, curled on his side, breathing shallowly. Samantha sat up. Is he? He's alive, Bridget said. For now. Rick swallowed hard. We need to check outside. Bridget nodded. I'll go with you. Samantha grabbed Rick's arms. Be careful. He kissed her forehead. Always. The fog was thinner today. Still green, still unnatural, but lighter. Its grip on the world loosening. Bodies lay scattered across the parking lot. Dozens of them. Some twisted, some curled, some sprawled where they dropped mid-stride. Rick stepped closer to one. The skin was cracked and dry, flaking at the edges. The eyes were cloudy, the mouth hung open, teeth stained and shadowed. Bridget nudged the body with her boot. No movement. They're dying, she said quietly. Rick nodded. The gas is burning them out. Bridget scanned the tree line. If the fog's thinning, we might have a chance to get out of town. Rick's heart lifted, then sank just as fast. Jeff was in no shape to go anywhere, not like this. Jeff was awake when they returned. He sat slumped against the wall, arms loose around his knees, not quite looking at anything. Rick knelt beside him. How are you feeling? Jeff let out a hollow, broken laugh. My bones are burning from the inside. Samantha brought him water. He took it with trembling fingers. Bridget crouched in front of him. Jeff, the infected outside are dying. The fog's thinning. We might be able to move soon. Jeff closed his eyes. Good. Rick frowned. Good. Jeff looked up, and for a moment his eyes were clear. The Jeff they knew. You need to leave me. Samantha shook her head immediately. No, absolutely not. Jeff's voice cracked. Sam, I'm not getting better. Bridget didn't argue. She didn't have to. Rick felt his throat tighten. We're not leaving you. Jeff grabbed Rick's wrist, his grip surprisingly powerful. You have to. I can feel it. It's in my head, in my blood. I'm holding on, but it's winning. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Jeff, please. He pulled her into a trembling hug. You two survived because you weren't here when the fog hit. Don't waste that. Rick looked at Bridget, silently begging her to say something, anything that would make this not real. But Bridget's expression was hard, her eyes damp. She knew. They all knew. That night, Jeff's condition worsened. He paced the room, muttering under his breath. His hands twitched. His eyes darted to shadows that weren't there. At one point, he stopped and stared at the door. Do you hear that? He whispered. Rick listened. Hear what? Jeff's voice dropped to a growl. They're calling me. Samantha stepped back. Jeff! He turned toward her, too fast. Rick moved between them. Hey, look at me. It's Rick. You know me. Jeff blinked rapidly, struggling to focus. Rick, I'm trying so hard. Bridget raised her weapon slightly, not aiming, just ready. Jeff saw it, and he nodded. Good, he whispered. You might need that. Later, when Jeff finally collapsed into an exhausted sleep, the three of them gathered near the door. Rick's voice was barely audible. We can't leave him. Bridget's tone was steady, but her eyes were red. If he turns, he'll kill us. Samantha wiped her face. He saved us. We owe him more than this. Bridget looked at both of them. We owe him the truth. And the truth is, he's dying. Slower than the others, but heading towards the same end. Rick felt something inside him break. Samantha whispered, What do we do? Bridget took a long breath. We stay tonight. One more night. If he's still himself in the morning, we decide then. Rick nodded. Samantha nodded. Neither of them slept. Jeff didn't wake up screaming. He didn't wake up at all, not really. He sat against the wall, eyes open, breathing shallowly, staring at nothing. Rick approached slowly. Jeff? No response. Samantha knelt beside him. Jeff, please. His head turned, slowly and mechanically, toward her voice. His eyes were unnatural. Bridget stepped forward. Rick, Sam, back up. Jeff's lips curled into something that wasn't a smile, and when they pulled back further, his gums had gone the same dark green-black as the veins in his arms, teeth stark against it. Then, he lunged, fast and sudden, nothing clumsy about it. The turning point had come and nothing would ever be the same. Rick barely had time to react before Jeff slammed into him, knocking him backwards into a stack of metal crates, the impact rattling the whole depot. Jeff's nails raked across Rick's shoulder before Rick got an arm up, tearing through jacket and skin in 4 long lines. Rick screamed and drove an elbow into Jeff's jaw, hard enough to split his own knuckles open. Samantha screamed his name, scrambling to pull Jeff off him. The Jeff they knew was gone. His eyes had gone glassy, pupils blown wide, and his breath came in ragged, animal snarls. His fingers clawed at Rick's shirt, tearing fabric, hunting for skin. Rick shoved him back with everything he had. Jeff, stop, please! The man who had saved them, who had led them, was gone. Bridget put another round into the ceiling. Jeff, stand down! He didn't flinch. He lunged. Again. This time, Bridget didn't hesitate. She drove her shoulder into him and took him down hard onto the concrete floor. Jeff thrashed with a strength the toxin had given him. Bridget grunted, struggling to pin him. Rick, help me! Rick grabbed Jeff's arms, trying to hold them down. Samantha grabbed his legs. Jeff bucked and twisted, teeth snapping inches from Rick's face. Jeff, please! Samantha cried. Fight it! For a split second, Jeff's eyes flickered. Recognition. Pain, a flash of the man he used to be. Then it was gone. He roared and threw Rick off him with terrifying ease. Bridget made the call. She pressed the weapon to Jeff's temple, her hand shaking. I'm not sure this will even stop him, she said, but it's what we've got. I'm sorry, she whispered. The shot echoed through the depot. Jeff went still. Samantha collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Rick stared at Jeff's body, chest heaving, unable to make sense of it. Bridget holstered her weapon with shaking hands. We need to move. Now. Rick looked up, eyes burning. We can't just leave him. We don't have a choice, Bridget said, her voice breaking. The fog's thinning. The infected are dying. This is our window. Samantha wiped her face. Where do we go? Bridget pointed to the back of the depot. Maintenance tunnels. They run under the plant and out past the ridge. If we can get through, we can get out of town. Rick nodded, swallowing hard. Then let's go. He took Samantha's hand. They didn't look back at Jeff. The entrance to the maintenance tunnels was hidden behind a rusted metal door in the back room. Bridget grabbed the crowbar from near the front entrance and forced the door open. A wave of frigid, musty air rushed out. Rick shined his flashlight down the narrow concrete corridor. It reeks of death, Samantha whispered. Bridget stepped inside first. Stay close. These tunnels twist if we get separated. She didn't finish the sentence. They moved fast, footsteps echoing off the walls. The deeper they went, the louder the sounds became. Distant groans, shuffling, the scrape of something dragging against concrete. Rick tightened his grip on the axe. Samantha clung to his arm. Bridget kept her weapon raised, scanning every shadow. Halfway through the tunnel, they found the first infected. It lay on the ground, twitching weakly, skin cracked and peeling. Its eyes glowed faintly in the flashlight beam. Bridget stepped over it. Don't touch anything, she warned. They kept going. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder, the sounds louder. The infected were dying, but not dead yet. Some crawled, some twitched. Samantha squeezed his hand. We're almost out. I can feel it. Rick nodded. Yeah. Then Bridget stopped. The tunnel ahead was blocked. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, leaving only a narrow gap at the top, just wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Rick's heart sank. We can make it. Bridget didn't move. No, she said quietly. You two can make it. Samantha frowned. What are you talking about? Bridget pointed to a gate beside the collapse, a heavy steel security door with manual controls. It has to be closed from the inside. If we leave it open, the infected behind us will follow. If I close it from the outside, I won't be able to get through myself. Rick shook his head. No way, we are not leaving you. Bridget gave a small, tired smile. Rick, I'm not making it out of this town. You know that. Samantha's voice cracked. Bridget, please. Bridget stepped forward and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. You two survived because you were out there, away from the fog, away from all of this. That wasn't luck. That was life giving you a chance. Don't waste it. Rick felt tears burning his eyes. Bridget. She pulled him into a hug, then pulled Samantha into one. Go, she whispered, before I change my mind. Rick hesitated. Samantha didn't. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the gap. Rick, she said softly, we have to. He nodded, throat tight. They climbed through the narrow opening into a smaller tunnel that sloped upward toward the daylight. Behind them, Bridget pulled the lever. The steel gate slammed shut with a deafening clang. Bridget! Samantha screamed. Rick pressed his face to the bars, eyes wide. Bridget stood on the other side, weapon raised, facing the shadows behind her. She gave them one last smile. Run. The infected surged out of the shadows in a wave of torn skin and exposed teeth, and Bridget fired until the weapon clicked. Empty, her shots dropping the first two in the doorway and doing nothing to slow the rest. Then, the screams began. Wet and short, and didn't last as long as Rick expected. Rick dragged Samantha away, both of them sobbing, stumbling toward the light. They didn't stop running, not until they burst out of the tunnel into the frigid morning air, collapsing on the grass as the sun rose over a dying town. The fog died before the town did. It thinned day by day, losing its color, its glow, whatever unnatural pulse had once driven it. By the end of the third week, it was nothing more than a faint haze drifting through the streets, the last traces of a storm long past. Hollow Creek stopped. The infected collapsed where they stood. In yards and cars in the middle of the road, some curled into themselves, limbs loosely folded as if mid-sleep. Others froze mid-stride, bodies twisted, eyes glazed over. The town was silent. Rick and Samantha stood on the ridge overlooking Hollow Creek, the morning sun casting long shadows across the valley. The air was crisp, the first clean air they'd breathed in weeks. Samantha wrapped her arms around herself. It looks dead. Rick didn't answer. He couldn't. From up here, the town looked frozen, colorless, abandoned. The diner, the hospital, the sheriff's station, all still, all holding memories he didn't want to think about. Samantha leaned into him. We should go down. See if anyone else made it. Rick nodded, though he already knew the answer. They walked the long dirt path into town, boots crunching over dry leaves. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt, thick with everything that had happened here. The first body they passed was slumped against a mailbox, skin gone waxy and sunken over the bone. insects already working at what the fog had left behind. The second lay half in, half out of a pickup truck, one arm bent backward against the doorframe in a way that hadn't happened when it fell. The third was curled on a porch swing, its head resting on a pillow someone had placed there, dark fluid soaked into the fabric beneath it. Samantha whispered, "They didn't even make it inside." Rick swallowed. They didn't have time. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly, still trying to glow, even though the power grid had long since failed. The blood on the pavement had dried into shadowed, brittle stains. Samantha stopped in front of the door. "This is where it started." Rick nodded. "For us, yeah." They walked inside. The booth sat empty and the counter was dusty. A coffee cup sat on the table nearest the window, half full, as though someone had meant to come back for it. Samantha traced her fingers along the counter. "I used to complain about this place. The smell, the customers, the hours." Rick smiled faintly. "You hated the pancakes." "They were rubber," she said, managing a small laugh. "But I'd give anything to have one more terrible breakfast here." Rick wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We made it out. That has to mean something." She leaned into him. "It does. It really does." But her voice trembled. They saved the depot for last. Neither of them wanted to go back, but they knew they had to. The steel door was still shut, the metal bolt still in place. Rick hesitated before opening it. "You ready?" he asked. Samantha nodded, though her eyes said otherwise. They stepped inside. The air was musty. The blankets were still piled in the corner. The empty water bottles were still scattered across the floor. The bullet hole Bridget had put in the ceiling stared down, dark and unblinking. Jeff's body was gone. Rick froze. "What the?" Samantha grabbed his arm. "Rick, look." A trail of dried blood led from the corner to the door. Rick's heart pounded. He got up. Samantha shook her head. "The fog never let him go, not even after." Rick followed the trail to the back door, the one leading to the tunnels. It stood open. Something cold moved through Rick's chest, sudden and unwelcome. "He followed us." Samantha squeezed his hand. "He didn't catch us." Rick nodded slowly. "Bridget stopped him." They stood in silence for a long moment. Jeff had fought the infection longer than anyone else, long enough to make sure they survived. Bridget had given everything else. Rick closed the door gently. "Let's go." They packed what little they could carry. Water, canned food, a map, a flashlight. Rick grabbed the fire axe he'd carried since the first week. They stood at the edge of town as the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the ruins. Samantha took Rick's hand. "Where do we go?" Rick looked at the road stretching out before them, cracked and overgrown, but open. "Anywhere," he said. "Everywhere." She smiled softly. "As long as we go together." Rick kissed her forehead. "Always." They took their first steps away from Hollow Creek, leaving behind the fog, the bodies, the memories, and the ghosts. The world ahead was uncertain, but they were alive, and that was enough.